Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Friends of the South Grey Museum, I bid you a very warm welcome and a very cordial thank you for making it here tonight on a typical Grey County December evening. Before we begin, I'd ask you to all please rise and join in the singing of our national anthem. O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north, strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Thank you. As we begin our celebration of Agnes Campbell Macphail this evening, we'd like to formally recognize that we are meeting on Anishinaabe traditional territory. We would also like to welcome you and to thank you for being here this evening, as I mentioned earlier, on a typical snowy, windy, Grey County December. Agnes, if she was here tonight, would be smiling. Winter weather has always been a challenge for events in our neck of the woods. During Agnes's term in politics, there were many events, meetings, and meet and greets which were challenged by the snows, the wintry weather, and the winds. The press recorded that at one of her meetings, and here's the quote, some of the audience literally had cold feet because they were standing on the frozen clay floor. As a matter of fact, her funeral on February the 24th, 1954, was in the middle of a snowstorm. And because the roads were impassable to vehicles, the pallbearers had to carry and bear her coffin a great distance over slippery, snow-covered roads. Some things change, but winters in Grey County continue on their snowy way. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight the Friends of the South Grey Museum continue celebrating the achievements of Agnes Campbell Macphail. This journey of celebration, discovery, and recognition began in 2017 and is the fifth in a series of the Friends of the South Grey Museum's presentations, each one unique, entertaining, and knowledge-filled. The first in 2017 was Agnes Macphail, the Lady from Grey. It was a look at her 1921 rise into politics and her 1922 entry as the first sitting female member of Canada's Parliament in Ottawa. The event featured Jean Hutchison in her role as the lady herself. In 2018, we celebrated Agnes's inclusion on the Bank of Canada's $10 banknote. That evening included a Royal Canadian Mounted Police Honor Guard. In 2019, it was Happy Birthday, Agnes, a look at Agnes's life in Grey County and her legacy. During the height of the pandemic, in 2021, the pandemic couldn't stop the Friends of the South Grey Museum because we celebrated the installation of the Holger Meyerham created Agnes Campbell Macphail Memorial Quilt. It was installed on the wall of the museum. This was a virtual video Leaking Ambient Studios podcast, and it included 12 panelists, their greetings, their comments, and insights. We continue tonight with, it's gone, with no bed of roses. Another look, there we are, thank you. Another look at Agnes and her life. Present this evening to bring greetings are representatives of the three levels of government. Our member of the federal parliament, Alec Ruff, is due to pressing commitments unable to attend. He will, however, be seen in the documentary. With us tonight, we have a very special guest, and that is Joan Burrows and her husband, Jim. Joan is the grandniece of Agnes Macphail. She is the granddaughter of Lily Macphail, one of Agnes's sisters. There were three sisters. And Joan was telling me that at the funeral of Agnes Macphail, she was 10 years old and remembers quite a bit about her great aunt. So Joan, please rise and be acknowledged by all of us. And thank you both for being here. Representing us at the provincial level is a person who has served our area as a volunteer and a leader in numerous local capacities. He is currently a strong supporter of the endeavors that you see in culmination today. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Rick Byers, member of provincial government for Bruce Grey, Owen Sound. Rick.
Well, thank you very much, Terry, and good evening, everyone. Great to be here at a special occasion for such an extraordinary lady, Agnes Macphail. And as I was thinking about tonight, I'll never forget when Grey Highlands became our home 2011, I think it was the first time I'd heard about Agnes Macphail, this extraordinary woman who was the first female MP in Canada, just an extraordinary. And I thought I'd always had an interest in politics and gone through elections, and for me as a guy, thinking about this woman who had to do everything much more on a much more challenging level than folks like that I would have, and just an extraordinary. And I remember, speaking of the $10 bill, every time I get one of these with her picture on it, I save it because she's extraordinary. And I must say, since being an MPP now for six months, it's even more that I appreciate her extraordinary achievement. So when I go into Queen's Park in the legislature, I go in the east door, and there are a whole bunch of pictures of prominent women in Canadian politics, and she's right there in several places right at the front. So I see her every day I go to work, and it inspires me, I assure you. And having been now in Parliament 6 months, knowing how tough that is, even makes me acknowledge all the more the extraordinary achievements of this extraordinary lady, Agnes Macphail. So thank you to the South Grey Museum for all you're doing in honoring her heritage, and look forward to the presentation tonight, and good evening, and thank you.
Thank you, Rick, and thank you for taking time to be with us this evening. From the beautiful Grey County area, lovingly called Stony Keppel, here to present greetings in her capacity as County Councillor, please welcome in her third term on Council, the current Mayor of Georgian Bluffs, Sue Carleton. Sue.
That's good. Thank you. Thank you, Terry. Thank you, everyone, for having me here this evening. I'm really pleased to be part of today's event. As Terry said, I'm Grey County Councillor Sue Carleton, and I'm proud to bring greetings from the County of Grey to everyone here today. Agnes Macphail has been referred to as the most important woman in public life that Canada produced in the 20th century. Wow. We are so proud of her rural Grey County roots and the paths she blazed. 100 years ago, Agnes Macphail made Canadian history, being the first Canadian female to be elected to the House of Commons. I can't even imagine the courage it must have taken. Agnes not only gave women a voice in politics, she opened the door for more to follow in her footsteps, inspiring generations after her. In Grey County, we don't just admire Agnes Macphail for what she achieved. We admire her because she embodied so many of the qualities we hold dear. She was strong. She was passionate. She was resilient. She was courageous. She was witty. She was determined. We see these traits today in our communities and our young leaders. Just tell us we can't do something and stand back and watch us do it. 100 years is a major milestone, and I thank the organizers of today's event for drawing attention to this important anniversary. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of honoring the wonderful Agnes Macphail. Thank you, and enjoy your evening.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you for your kind words. With a long history of supporting the efforts of the South Grey Museum and the Friends of the South Grey Museum, our next greetings come from our mayor. And now, unfortunately, our mayor is at another function this evening, so he will be presenting his greetings as soon as he can arrive. From our sister township to our south comes a man who has become a part of our celebration for many years and who now once again serves Southgate as its mayor. To present his greetings, please welcome Mayor Brian Milne.
Thank you, Terry. It's great to be here. As many of you will know, Agnes was born and raised in Proton Township, which is now part of the amalgamated township of Southgate. So today I was thinking what I was going to say this evening, and I was reflecting on our election just a month ago now, and I thought, isn't it ironic that Agnes, through her pioneering efforts, always advocated and championed the rights of women and others. A month ago in Southgate, we elected half of our council are women, and it was utterly unremarkable, because that's what we do in Southgate. So I just thought that was rather ironic. Anyway, congratulations to the organizers. They've done a great job. I look forward to tonight's presentation, and thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. Also a great supporter of the efforts of the South Grey Museum and of Grey Highlands, the municipality, and presenting greetings from our neighboring Western municipality, please say hello to the Mayor of West Grey, Kevin Eccles. Kevin, please.
Thank you, Terry. And yes, it's great to be here this evening. I'm looking forward to the presentation. And interesting, as a farming background, for a number of years I was a dairy farmer and retired from that and ended up in politics. But I think it was probably almost a genetic thing, of course, and the connection through the farming. We always go with that genealogy or the gene connection, especially in dairy industry, of where it came from. And as Brian had mentioned, how much of a connection that, not through the genes, but through her efforts, a lot of today's politicians still are connected to Agnes Macphail. My biggest connection, of course, was Agnes being voted in as an MP in 1921, and under the farming organization that it was, the CCF, Canadian CCF, that on the provincial side of it, she was really looking forward to that organization going. And in reading a couple of her books, you find out that the individual that she really started to promote was a gentleman by the name of Farquhar Oliver, who
went on to a very successful career at Queen's Park. You might see his picture down there a few times too, Rick. But in reading her book, what I found interesting was that she had a choice between two individuals that she was going to promote and decide on. And one of them, of course, was Farquhar Oliver, who is my uncle, or great uncle, and another guy by the name of Joe Crutchley. And I found that just fascinating. I never had known that. Joe Crutchley was my grandfather. And she had to make, and I have no idea to this date because Uncle Farquhar and Grandpa Joe are both gone, and I never had the opportunity and never knew that there was a choice until both of them had passed on. They'd never said anything. Yes, there was a lot of political conversations at dinners and whatnot that they were both involved with, but it was that legacy, and that's what really makes my personal connection to Agnes Macphail. I'm looking forward to seeing some of the stories, because if we get into Agnes Macphail's stories up here and some of the wit that she had, this will be a midnight presentation, so I'm not going to get involved in those ones. Terry, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here, and I look forward as well, too, as all of us will, to learning more about Agnes Macphail. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kevin. Just thinking as I'm shuffling papers, dairy farming, politics, not big leap. Some things are similar, but we won't get into what the similarities are. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a red carpet premiere documentary evening. No Bed of Roses. This red carpet evening rivals anything witnessed by the best theaters around the world. However, our premiere of this documentary is presented Grey County style. What does that mean? Well, you probably missed noticing the red carpet outside because it was covered with snow. Now, the paparazzi couldn't make it because they were afraid of getting storm stuck, and they were afraid of the winds. The ushers are all on work to rule, and the popcorn machine is out for repairs. But other than that, we're just like any Hollywood premiere of any great documentary. Still, this is the best documentary movie premiere this side of Highway 10. And we are sure that you will enjoy it this evening. Following the documentary, we will have a question and answer period, which will be focused on Agnes. It'll also be focused on the production of the documentary. So we ask you to enjoy, as you enjoy the documentary, to prepare any questions or comments which you may have. Ladies and gentlemen, in all seriousness, the Friends of the South Grey Museum have been the driving force in preserving, sharing, and celebrating our local history. All of the Friends have contributed countless hours in their very worthwhile endeavors. Two of note are Jane Gibson and Barry Penhale, both of whom have devoted their lives to ensuring that we honor, that we remember, and that we celebrate our heritage and our history. As a prelude, let's give them a big round of applause. As a prelude to the main reason we are here this evening, allow me to read Barry's very insightful and informative introduction. The birth of Agnes Campbell Macphail on March 24th, 1890, likely would not have created much of a stir beyond the Macphails' pioneer log house home in Proton Township, Grey County. One certainly could not have forecast at the time a future public life that saw Agnes become a nationally known figure in Canada, much admired as a political reformer, and so much more. But as is the case with others destined to achieve greatness, it would seem that all that lay ahead for Aggie, and she was being prepared by fate. That she was a proud, stand-on-her-own-feet Canadian Scot, some say, carved out of Scottish granite, proved, of course, to be a huge bonus, especially so in the hardball arena of federal politics. Life for Agnes, as this brand new documentary will remind us, was indeed no bed of roses. If we could enter a time machine and return to Agnes's era, one wonders what might be heard about one whose accomplishments included becoming one of the world's most sought-after public speakers. It's little known that, booked by the same agency that handled the stage appearances of H.G. Wells, Thornton Wilder, and Winston Churchill, Macphail rated so highly with the United States audiences as to be considered second only to Eleanor Roosevelt. Not bad for a once shy little girl from Grey County's farms. That Agnes Macphail is more than a mere footnote in Canadian history is partially owed to those biographers and historians who have chosen to examine her extraordinary life. Books about Aggie, and there are several in existence, fortunately, can still be found on library shelves. For the young adult reader, a series of books about Agnes has been published by the regional Brucedale Press, all authored by one of Macphail's biggest boosters, the Reverend Donna Mann. One can but hope that the lady from Grey will come to the attention of others emerging as writers. Will come to the attention through a new book as seen through today's lens. That would be an invaluable addition to the existing works in print. Exhaustive research by members of the Friends of the South Grey Museum has added greatly to our adventures of Agnes Macphail. Some findings have made their way into the original script that runs throughout the No Bed of Roses production. Fortunately, as an important spin-off, similar information now appears within the new Agnes Macphail Gallery in the recently renovated South Grey Museum. When dealing with a person of national importance, there are always exciting new discoveries. But regrettably, there are also those ever-present time constraints which limit or prohibit their use. But more books, films, and events lie ahead. These hopefully will further enrich our knowledge of the remarkable Agnes Campbell Macphail. There is yet much to be done as we sing the praises of our very own Aggie. From the very outset, the creative team charged with this responsibility, the responsibility of conceiving and producing an original documentary based on her life, the life of Agnes Macphail, fully agreed that a fresh approach to Aggie's life was paramount. Even in the handling of some of the better-known aspects of Macphail's personal history, the consensus was to be highly creative and whenever possible, avoid duplication of the same old stuff. Often repeated material that so many of us have come to know over these many years. No Bed of Roses utilizes a range of audio and visual elements in a fully scripted production, with the aim to be both informative and entertaining. For those involved, it has been a unique experience, particularly while working under the added constraints of the COVID pandemic. But it was their pleasure and our pleasure to soldier on, and now it will be the viewing audience that will determine if they have succeeded. Ladies and gentlemen, but before we present the Bed of Roses, I just noticed out of the corner of my eye that the Mayor of Grey Highlands was able to come from his other duties and is here to present greetings. So I now introduce our Mayor, our Grey Highlands Mayor, Mr. Paul McQueen. Paul.
What a great night. It feels so great to be here in person since we haven't been in person for quite a long time, and it's great to see everybody. And I'd like to thank the Friends of the South Grey Museum for their hard work in hosting this event, such as, I see Barry and Jane here, such as these that allow us to enjoy the outings that we do here. We're extremely fortunate here in Grey Highlands to have a continuous support and dedication of our community who have so willingly gave their time and energy towards ensuring that our history will be preserved for future generations. The South Grey Museum has undergone, as Terry has mentioned, a complete renovation and is looking forward to the official grand opening to showcase the new and improved space. With events like these, we can bring awareness to the importance of preserving our culture and our rich history for our community. I know we've been, Terry, I know you've hosted, and Jane and Barry have done a lot to do with Agnes Macphail, and it's great. And I see my colleagues here from neighboring municipalities. I know there's the debate with regards to Proton and Southgate, and we won't go there tonight. But I do want to, I was sort of searching a little bit, and I think Agnes Macphail is known for some of her quotes. So I had to get my cheaters here, and I pulled off some of that lovely thing called Google, and I might just mention a couple of those quotes if you don't mind me, Terry. So one was, never apologize, never explain, just get the thing done, and let them howl afterwards. That was one of her quotes. Hey, so true, right? Just get her done. Hey guys. I owe it to my father that I was elected to the Parliament in the first place, but I owe it to my mother that I stuck it out. So it's all about your roots coming forward, right? I suggest there is a splendid way out of the difficulty of marriage, and that is my way, stay out. And it goes on. I don't want to take too much more of your time, but I think she was quite famous, and I'm not sure how many quotes she's quoted on having, but there are a lot. And I would suggest that you look at some of those quotes because she was the first lady elected to the Parliament of Canada, and I think she was certainly a person. I won't say I think. I know she was. We all know she was. That she was a leader, and she certainly did some great things with regards to moving this country forward. So saying that, I bring greetings on behalf of Grey Highlands. I see we have a few councillors here from our newly elected council, some from the past term, and we have some coming forward. So we're getting sworn in on Monday for that, so we'll be big and better as we move on through Grey Highlands. But again, I want to welcome everybody here and bring greetings again from Grey Highlands, and thanks for coming and your patience for me getting here, because I did have another event to attend tonight, and it is part of the duties of the mayor, and it's all fun. So thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much for those warm greetings. Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to see the documentary that has been long in production, long overdue, and that we know you'll enjoy. So together, let's introduce, what's the name of it? Perfect. Maestro, please take it away.
I do not believe in a woman group, much as I believe in groups, but I do believe that women should now come to the House of Commons because they will take direct action, because they are interested in human welfare more than in making long speeches that are very difficult to follow.
Lone woman in the House of Commons. In keeping with her frugal nature, she declined the offer of one of the bigger offices, making it clear that she did not expect any special treatment because of her gender. Upon taking her rightful place in the House, Agnes, though fawned over briefly, was to be treated with hostility by her all-male colleagues. It was a lonely time, and she often wished to have the company of at least one other woman MP. But Gradually, in her 19 years in the House, Agnes Macphail was to earn the admiration from members of her own party and, in time, the respect of the opposition. No small feat for the woman member who was alone in an all-male enclave for her first 15 years in Parliament. Though the lone female MP in Ottawa, Agnes Macphail's voice was to become a powerful one as she spoke out on behalf of ordinary working men and women. Truly a champion of the underprivileged, Macphail's political life found her doing much more than fighting for the rights of farmers. She devoted her entire working years to equality, including her support in 1925 for the families of poorly paid Glace Bay miners. But there is no doubt that during her public life as a reformer, Agnes Macphail's single greatest achievement was bringing about long overdue sweeping improvements to the Canadian penal system. Macphail's various biographers have recognized her 40 years battle to bring about prison reform. Agnes first introduced the need for penal reform in a 1925 Commons debate. In Ask No Quarter, a published biography of Macphail, her concerns over prison problems and her important work in the penal system area are well documented. Here one also discovers a telling quote that provides insights into Macphail herself. Following a visit to the women's section of Kingston Penitentiary, Agnes, in a February 1934 House of Commons address, stated,
As I faced those women, I did not feel myself different from them. I simply felt that I had been in much more fortunate circumstances.
Agnes had agreed to see many ex-convicts at her Parliament Building's 6th floor office. Among these was Charles Baines, who first came to see Macphail in 1929, having just completed a 5-year term in Kingston Penitentiary. She was to hear from Baines at intervals over the next 4 years. And in the spring of 1933, he came to see Agnes and informed her that he was a victim of a, quote, conspiracy, and his arrest was imminent. As he predicted, he was arrested. And as a TB patient, he was alarmed at the prospect of his return to Kingston Penitentiary, which lacked the facilities for treatment of tubercular patients. He begged Agnes to intervene, and she sent a private telegraph to an old adversary, Hugh Guthrie, then Minister of Justice in the Bennett government, citing Baines' war record with reference to the tuberculosis condition resulting from his time in the army. Macphail asked the minister if Baines could be sent to other facilities such as Burwash, Guelph, or Mimico. As the penitentiary system was to be dealt with on the floor of the Commons, Agnes asked her secretary to request a file on Charles Baines from the Office of the Department of Justice. Despite repeated attempts, the file was not made available. Though barely over an illness, Macphail moved her resolution that an investigation into the penal system was needed, and in doing so played right into Guthrie's trap. He then deliberately read aloud from the Baines file a lengthy list of indecent assault and gross indecency charges, none of which was known to Macphail. Considering the social climate of the time, it was a bombshell. Greatly humiliated, the member from South Grey was to learn that Conservative sources in her riding planned a smear campaign around the incident. It is a measure of the lady's fortitude and character that she was to say,
If one is warm-hearted and helpful as life goes on, one is bound to make mistakes. I think it is inevitable.
But the months that followed were not those of a subdued Lady MP, as with newfound determination, Agnes pushed even harder for reforms to Canada's prison system. At his brother's request, she visited Charles Bain in his Kingston Penitentiary cell, accompanied by the warden. From Bain and others, she was to learn of Guthrie's earlier moves to discredit her while attempting to end Macphail's ongoing battle for prison reform. It was obvious that a full-scale inquiry into prison conditions was essential. In this, Agnes had accomplished her main purpose. But there was nothing too low for Hugh Guthrie and his cohorts when it came to their serious attempts to discredit Parliament's lone independent woman member. It was Guthrie, aided by J.D. Dawson, Senior Inspector of Penitentiaries, whose intended smear campaign to ruin Macphail came perilously close to being successful. Life in the big league of politics, as a young Macphail discovered, was indeed no bed of roses.
On Peace and the Global Village, 1928. One might ask, what is patriotism? Surely it is loyalty to a group, but sometimes we forget that we owe loyalty to many groups. We cannot have too much loyalty, but we can have too much loyalty to one group, forgetting the other groups to which we also belong. We are more and more coming to know that every one of us belongs to that group which is known as humanity, and that we do owe a very great loyalty to that largest group of all, humanity.
Scottish ancestry. In her unpublished manuscript titled My Ain Folk, Agnes Campbell Macphail expressed great admiration for her Scottish ancestors and such family characteristics as sticking to one's principles, which she compared to the foundation of Scottish granite. She went on to reflect on the desperate conditions that forced the Macphails to leave the village of Kilmartin in the scenic Oban region of Scotland as they emigrated to Canada in about 1846, settling firstly between Galt and Guelph. But upon turning 20, her grandfather, Alexander Macphail, struck out on foot to Mount Forest, and then east to Proton, to squat on the land that in time he acquired legally. The site was on the 12th concession of the township. As it happened, close by on the 14th concession were the Campbells. Enthralled by their discoveries upon delving into Campbell family Scottish history, Agnes Macphail again encountered familiar characteristics of courage, determination, and independence. An unexpected discovery involved her grandfather John Campbell, who at 13 won a rare prize for the best letter about a plan for life.
Dear teacher, in a few years I will go to America, where there are no landlords and no rent and no queen. I will get a house of my own there and a farm, maybe 2 farms. I will have a home of my own and a farm before I'm 30 years old, and a wife too, John Campbell.
And he did exactly that. First by marrying a local lass, Jean Black, then emigrating to Canada, surviving 10 weeks of horrific weather as passengers on the Heather Bell, and the death of an infant son who was buried at sea. Fortunately, by 1855, things were looking up for the Scottish homesteaders, and John Macphail and John Campbell, now neighbors in Proton Township, had become close friends. Their families had much in common, and, not unexpectedly, Macphail's oldest son, Dougal, and the eldest Campbell daughter, Henrietta, chose to marry. But not until Dougal was almost 30 and his help raising numerous younger siblings was no longer needed. The newlyweds' first home was a pioneer log house, which Henrietta despised, especially in winter when it was cold and drafty, and calls of nature meant a trek to the outhouse. But Agnes, Gertha, and Lillian, the 3 young girls born to Dougal and Henrietta, delighted in time spent in a kitchen that was both spacious and attractive. By the time she was 12, Agnes' parents had purchased a more conventional red brick farmhouse at 6 Corners near Ceylon, a home that could be heated throughout during the winter months. It marked the beginning of an increasingly prosperous time for the Macphail family. In his meticulously researched best-selling book, How the Scots Invented Canada, popular historian Ken McGowan devoted an entire section to 3 strong Scottish-Canadian women reformers. One was Agnes Campbell Macphail. References to her unpublished family history, My Ain Folk, tell us that after the house recessed in 1922, Macphail sailed to Glasgow, then proceeded to Argyll. Here, in an ancient stone church, she experienced a profound presence of her Kilmartin ancestors. Once back in Canada, Agnes, out of a newfound closeness to her Scottish forebears, adopted a change in the spelling of her surname. From then on, she used the ancestral spelling of Macphail with a lowercase p. According to Rachel Wyatt in her book, Agnes Macphail, Champion of the Underdog, Agnes would formally change her name to Macphail in 1925. In response to a newspaper editor's letter asking about the spelling of her surname, Agnes replied from Ceylon on July 8, 1925.
Regarding the business of my name, it is puzzling, even to me. My people spell it Macphail with a capital P, but I write it Macphail. I have changed it to one word with a small p, and I like it better that way. It is easier written and looks better. So be it. Yours sincerely, Agnes Macphail. 1928. Country living makes for character. And because of the need of character in all national undertakings, and because of the importance of agriculture in our national life, we see how disastrous the results must be if people continue to leave the land.
Early years. The eldest of three daughters, born to Scottish-Canadian parents Dugald Macphail and Henrietta Campbell, Agnes Macphail was born in a log cabin in Proton Township, Grey County, on March 24, 1890. Only a year before, her father had married the eldest daughter of nearby neighbors John and Jean Jacks Campbell. In the few surviving pages of an autobiography that Agnes began to write in adulthood, we learn briefly of her interest in family and clan history, and we sense her increasing appreciation for both Campbell and Macphail ancestors. It's here that we discover how her parents began their married life with $800, a team of oxen, and a few pieces of old mismatched furniture. Throughout much of her own lifetime, Agnes was enthralled by the stories of Scotland and of pioneering in the Canadian bush, as vividly recalled by her grandmother Campbell, whom Agnes adored and described as
Brave and bonny.
To young Agnes, Granny Campbell was to occupy an honored place among family members, and her profound influence contributed enormously to Aggie's sense of duty, a respect for family traditions, and a pride in her Scottish roots. So beloved by Agnes was her grandmother Campbell that not even the greatest pressure brought on by a demanding life in politics could keep them apart. At 5 years old, Agnes Macphail began her earliest formal school education as a student at the small rural school SS No. 4 Proton, which she attended until age 12. At this point, her parents, having purchased a more comfortable brick farmhouse, made the not-too-distant move to their new property near Ceylon. Here, in a warmer home with inside plumbing, the Macphail residence quickly became a popular center for neighborly gatherings, a magnet for visiting local farming families. The men's talk, which always centered around farm issues and politics, proved to be much greater interest to Agnes than kitchen matters or children's games, much to the disappointment of her younger sisters, Gertha and Lily. Though she adored both her parents, the young Agnes, finding housework of little interest, chose instead to take on farm chores. That put her in the company of her father, who by this time was an increasingly in-demand auctioneer. Craving the education needed to become a teacher, Agnes, at age 14, passed her high school entrance examination, only to be informed that she was needed at home and to put thoughts of further education out of her head. But after 2 years, her parents relented, and at age 16, Agnes took the 30-mile train journey to enter high school at Owen Sound, and found herself in the same room as a Georgian Bay lad who later, as Dr. Norman Bethune, became famous for his groundbreaking missionary medical work in China. Young Agnes proved to be a bright and determined student, and in only 2 years was to obtain her junior matriculation. Her immediate next step found her enrolled in Stratford Normal School. Needing accommodation, Agnes boarded at the time with an uncle and his wife, members of the reorganized Church of Latter-day Saints. Her uncle's strong religious views extended to forbidding dancing. But Agnes dearly loved to dance and found it difficult to feel sinful when dancing won out. But attending the normal school and successfully writing her examination were the steps needed that would permit Agnes to realize her ambition to become an elementary country school teacher. She was about to have her own classroom.
On Character, Community, and Country Life, 1925. One of the most gratifying things to me is the tremendous love that surrounds me in this community. I hold the trust of the people as my most sacred possession. Nothing else matters.
Becoming a school marm. First, you had to get their attention. So reads a chapter heading found in the delightful book, The Little Schools of Grey. The book, published by Conestoga Press in 1982, was so well received as to warrant 3 printings that year. Historical researchers still welcome this publication by the late Millie Hubbard of Markdale, a valuable source of information on local school days past. Grey County's own Agnes Macphail knew from childhood that she wanted to become a country school teacher. And upon completion of her teacher's training at Stratford Normal School, she found herself in her first classroom at Gowanlocks, 4 miles east of Port Elgin. Macphail could not be happier, as she not only enjoyed the school, but also delighted in the family she was boarding with, the Gowanlocks. Agnes was thrilled. Finally, her dream of becoming a teacher was realized, and at what seemed like a huge salary of $500 a year. When not teaching, the new teacher quickly found herself immersed in numerous social activities, and in this way fitted right in, making new friends among the area's farm families. This is likely when it first was rumored that the rural school teacher from Ceylon taught by day and danced away the evening hours, on one occasion until daybreak. Throughout her lifetime, Agnes was known to enjoy parties, especially dancing. Until now, Agnes had got by on very little and knew how to be thrifty. But now that she was a wage earner, she quickly showed a generous side, and it gave her much pleasure on a family Thanksgiving weekend to return home with gifts for her parents and her sisters. Neither parent was pleased, and she was scolded for what they saw as uncalled for extravagance. Agnes Macphail's second school was at Kinloss, located roughly halfway between Kincardine and Walkerton. Here, she boarded with Mr. and Mrs. Sam Braden, owners of 2 well-patronized stores. Sam Braden was a staunch supporter of the Liberal Party, and he thrived on political discussions, many of which took place in his stores after business hours. Placing much value on Miss Macphail's opinion, Braden took to involving Agnes in lively gatherings concerning politics and farm-related matters. The year was 1911, and free trade with the USA was a major election campaign issue. The political talk at Sam Braden's store, with Agnes often front and center, often reached the boiling point, energizing Agnes's growing interest in the plight of farmers. However, between teaching and political potboilers, plus socializing, Macphail's health so declined that it was necessary to leave Kinloss and return home. She next taught briefly at Boothville before taking a teaching position at Pegg's School near the village of Sharon in York County. Again, Agnes was to enjoy wide acceptance from students and parents alike, and quickly acquired the nickname Mac. It was here that she once more became involved with the issues facing the local farming community, and a thought was beginning to occur. As much as she loved Sharon and her school, there just might be more than teaching ahead.
On a Philosophy for Life, 1933. 1. Cut out non-essentials. Don't do things which are of no use to you and give neither help nor joy to others. Don't belong to clubs that are no value to anybody and waste time and energy. 2. Be natural. Polish the natural, but do not distort it. All great souls are natural and simple. 3. Do not rely completely on any other human being, however dear. We meet all life's greatest tests alone. 4. Live in the present. Yesterday is gone. Tomorrow has not arrived. Live today. Don't live for today, but in today.
Finding her political voice. While teaching in East Gwillimbury Township, County of York, Agnes Macphail found her personal political feelings increasing. She had become focused on rural matters, and she read extensively about cooperatives, systems. Agnes had written a letter to the editor of the Farmer's Son, the Journal of the United Farmers of Ontario, in support of those farmers' wives who provided accommodation for rural teachers. The reply she received intensified her emerging political beliefs. The editor, having recognized Macphail's potential as an effective voice for the farming community, invited the young teacher to join the United Farmers of Ontario. Her first public speech, entitled Why Farmers Should Organize, lasted 10 minutes. Encouraged by the attention received from men and women in her audience, she soon went on to become known as a greatly in-demand speaker. And as the UFO gained ground, so did her profile and her popularity. Women who were British citizens or wives of military personnel had won the right to vote in 1918. By 1919, they could run for election. Agnes Macphail's political future lay ahead. A rigorous workload of teaching by day with evenings and weekends given to supporting the United Farmers of Ontario was affecting Agnes's health. In February 1920, after delivering a speech, she was diagnosed with smallpox and quarantined for several weeks. That summer, she resigned from teaching in Sharon and returned to Proton Township to live with her grandmother on the Campbell homestead. She began making pro-UFO speeches in her local township, and her popularity surged. Before long, Charles Ramage, publisher of the Durham Review, suggested that Agnes Macphail would make an excellent UFO independent Labour candidate for Southeast Grey. The UFO political convention was held at the Durham Town Hall on September 26, 1920. With the overwhelming support of the Proton delegates, she defeated the 10 other nominees, all male. The very next day brought protests. A woman federal candidate? A second meeting was held in Flesherton, and Agnes was asked to step down to make way for a man. Quote, a better choice in the minds of many, including numerous women who went on to say, but Agnes stood her ground and was heard to say,
I won, fair and square.
The young Miss Macphail, the Progressive Party UFO federal candidate, hit the ground running in an arduous election campaign that found her speaking to voters in all corners of Southeast Grey. Whether it be in halls, big and small, or standing on the back of a wagon, Macphail's campaign speeches resonated with rural voters. UFO party organizers realized that their candidate was the best communicator for the farming community. However, the campaign found Agnes exhausted by the December 6th election date. By then, she had traveled hundreds of miles by train, horse, and buggy, and occasionally in a car loaned to her by supportive farmers. Overnight lodgings found her under the roof of farmhouses scattered throughout her riding. She lost count of the number of beds on which she slept in her campaign travels. As she made her way home to face the results of the election day, the weary campaigner wondered,
Am I to remain a teacher with an outside interest in politics?
But a clear winter day made possible a huge voter turnout, and one by one the farm community came through for Agnes. Neighbors filled the Macphail farmhouse in a long day's wait, hoping that their candidate would top the polls. A close family friend, Donald Stewart, kept everyone informed as results came in by phone. Until finally, putting the telephone down, he said,
Friends, we have made history in the constituency of South East Grey. We have elected the first woman to the Parliament of Canada.
To cap a day whose results gave Agnes a place in history, she joined friends and party workers as the jubilant group made their way to the Durham Town Hall to celebrate. The farm vote had won the day. The year 1921 was close to an end, and a political future lay ahead for the 31-year-old Miss Macphail.
When I hear men talk about women being the angels of the home, I always, mentally at least, shrug my shoulders in doubt. I do not want to be the angel of any home. I want for myself what I want for other women, absolute equality. After that is secured, then men and women can take turns being angels.
Jim Palmer remembers.
I was a pallbearer at her funeral, and it was one of the typical Grey County storms up in Grey, but at Priceville. And we had, after the funeral in the church, we had to carry her casket for 2 miles down a country road over snowbanks. And there was an old gentleman who followed us down. He must have been close to 80. And he said, well, Aggie came in on the storm and she's bloody well going out on one. I don't know how many of you would recall the Charlotte Whitten, who was the mayor of Ottawa for some years, and one of the really great authorities on child welfare and so on, not only in Canada, but also in North America. At Agnes's funeral, there was a large sheaf of lilies there, which bore the card, to the greatest Canadian woman of the 20th century. The signature on the card was that of Charlotte Whitten. At the other end, there was printed an editorial from the Kingston Penitentiary paper called The Telescope. Conditions are far better now, 1954, than in the 1930s, when Agnes Macphail set foot within the old north gate of this institution. The changes wrought within these cold gray walls are her handiwork. To her must go the tribute. And then from a penitentiary on the West Coast, we have lost a friend. May you rest in peace, Agnes Macphail. That's who we're talking about tonight. I hope I can tell you some things about her. She was a very unique person. She had a flashing wit, and I mean a wit. Her audience wit, they enjoyed her. She could intersperse her speech with humorous things, many of which have become well known in this country. But that wasn't her purpose. Into that wit and so on, the real serious purpose was what she was instilling into people. They heard it without realizing it. And it was amazing, the influence that she had on people of that. She had scores of deadly enemies, I'll mention some tonight, and thousands of enthusiastic admirers. She was impatient and persistent, sincere and devastatingly forthright, impulsive in some fields and painstaking in others. She was so sensitive that she suffered from every slight, so courageous that she could not be halted by the most vicious attack, and some of them were abused. She was a great admirer of thrift and an extravagant spender. She was a conundrum. There's no question about that. He had called me 1935 to see if she could see me that day in Flushing. Took me out to her home where her mother was and propositioned to me, used it correctly, that would I campaign for her. Well, I forgot that the election was going to be several weeks after I was supposed to be back at university. She phoned the university and got permission from the dean for me to work in the campaign, and he said to her at the time, he'll learn far more from you in 7 weeks than he will in university in the same time. I'm not sure it was true, but anyway, I enjoyed it. It was a real experience. Agnes did it because she thought what she did was right, and that's the one thing you have to keep always in mind when you're dealing with Agnes Macphail. But anyway, she was on a tour of the States speaking. By the way, by this time, she was one of the 3 or 4 best, highest-paid speakers in North America. So she was on a tour there, and she got a telegram from King saying, I am appointing you to go as a delegate to the League of Nations. Agnes phoned back to him, or wired back to him and said, who else is going? And when she got the list, she said, no way, she told him, no way, I'm not going. You haven't got certain groups represented. So King said, well, don't do anything rash, don't make a decision, I'll see what I can do. So he telephoned her the next day and told her that he had appointed 3 other people whom she approved of to go overseas to the League of Nations. Interestingly enough, she went over there. She was the first Canadian woman to go to the League of Nations. Agnes had 3 minutes to reply to that at the end of the thing. I was sitting in a front row down at the side, and there were about 20 reporters from Toronto and elsewhere sitting behind me. And Agnes walked out to the front. I can still see her. She walked out to the front, and she looked at the audience. Now, there were 3/4 of the audience were farmers. This was 1930, the height of the Depression and the rest of it. And she looked at me and said, you want to know what Mr. Bennett did for you? Put your hands in your pockets and find out. She turned and sat down. The reporters behind said, she's won the election. And yet it was forecast she was going to lose the election. She did win it. People don't forget those things. This was what at that time was known as the House of Refuge, the poor house. You went there to die, that type of thing. Anyway, Nora Francis goes up and in the front door and says to the a man that was there at a desk doing some work, and she says, can you tell me if Agnes Macphail is here? And without cracking a smile, he says, not yet.
Remarks very much. I'm from Flusherton.
Oh, are you? Isn't it lucky I didn't say anything about Flusherton?
My name is Banks. My last name is Banks. My first name is Jack. And when I would estimate 8 or 9 years old, Agnes Macphail, and we called her Aunt Aggie. Agnes would come charging into the house. She called me Little Jack, and she'd say, is your mother here? And my mother's name was Jane, and Agnes always called her Jane, but she wanted her teacup read. Teacup. And I can't begin to tell you how many times she was in our home, and she would come running in and say, Gene, you got to read my teacups. Please. And I often thought her whole political career was based on that.
On Timing, 1948. I realize, too, there is nothing so powerful as an idea whose day has arrived. Timing is the thing. For example, right now we are passing through an age of social consciousness, and many things are being accomplished now that could never have been done a generation ago, no matter how hard a person worked. Look at family allowances. The time for them had come. And even those who originally fought against them finally voted for them.
The Macphail landscape.
Well, it's a lovely, almost summer-like fall day today. I didn't expect it, actually, on the first day of October, to be so delightful, sitting here on the deck as if it's summer with my coffee. It's always a good day when you have your coffee handy. Well, we enjoy life living in a red brick farmhouse. It's greatly beyond a century in age. And I think that Agnes at one time would have been very familiar with this place. First of all, very close to her school route when she went to school, and not very far at all from the former site of her parents' property. That's near a landmark that's still called Six Corners. And there Agnes, with her two sisters, younger sisters, Gertha and Lily, grew up on a farm property and stayed there until they became adults. Agnes, of course, didn't marry. She was pulled in the direction of the political arena. Agnes, in time, bought a lovely little home in the hamlet of Ceylon, a home that is still there. It was once actually the home to the actress Diane Gordon, who crossed Canada in a one-woman show playing Agnes.
I first became aware of Agnes Macphail and her legacy in conversation with David Switzer and Teresa Sears. Currently known for their cabaret-style performances as Sears and Switzer, they have performed professionally for many decades. I was living in Toronto in the 80s, catching whatever work I could as an actor, and there was not much work for women of a certain age in the theater world. I phoned David and Teresa and asked if they could write me a one-woman show that I could own and go on to produce. They told me about Agnes Macphail, who they had just learned about while teaching and performing in Grey County. I was enthralled to learn about this firebrand politician/activist. Why did most of my women friends not know of her? I would be honored to portray her. I took out a modest bank loan and hired my writers. Agnes Macphail seemed to have been dropped from the pages of popular history. Teresa went to the archives in Ottawa seeking original material. She found 6 boxes. Most of the script derives from material found in those 6 boxes. The play is set in the reading room of Ottawa's archives. Macphail comes across a table containing 6 boxes of her personal archives. Someone is studying her life, it seems. She says in her opening lines, "So, they've come to find Aggie. And what are the dry bones they will pick amongst?" The rest of the script goes on to answer that question, introducing the audience to a history of her rich and consequential life. Over time, I managed to acquire the makings of a traveling theater show and even visited a few isolated communities, proud to be bringing these Canadians a piece of their national history. I can't recall how many times I performed the piece during that 10-year period, but do know her story impacted the lives of hundreds of people. Eventually, it became too expensive to continue. Most of those performances were in the 90s. In the early days, I was personally drawn to Agnes's life. I shared her enthusiasm for life, her belief in the importance of good work and commitment to community. In some ways, I guess, she became my mentor, even though she was no longer with us. She had made an impact on the way I viewed politically the use and abuse of power. And she was so bright and full of fun and witty. A pleasure to spend time with. In the 90s, I reorganized my personal life, choosing to leave the city for rural life. I chose Grey County. I also managed to acquire a lovely house near Flesherton. This home was previously owned by Agnes and lived in by her parents while she was in Ottawa. Shortly after, I sold the house to a couple of women who seemed to have a special interest in Macphail and moved to the small village of Proton Station. Eventually, I moved to the east end of Toronto, where I still live. I am now 84 and long past retired.
Outside that home, one can find a plaque. It's a federal plaque erected some years ago by the Canadian government, showing their respect for the lady from Grey. But also, you could call Agnes minimally a three-plaque woman because there's a plaque at Hopeville, not that far away from here, a nice little drive through Grey County, and there's a plaque in Toronto in front of her old Leaside home when she, of course, was representing provincially York East, that old riding that has since been swallowed up. Shortly after our marriage, our very first home was in the former borough of East York in Toronto. And it's a lovely neighborhood, and we made good friends among our neighbors and quickly discovered that Agnes Campbell Macphail had made many local admirers that to this very day do a wonderful job keeping her memory alive. Now, following that very distinguished federal political career that Agnes enjoyed, she then, as an Ontario MPP, represented her supporters in the old riding of York East. And thanks to some heritage-minded individuals, and some of them are longtime friends of ours, there is both a parquet and a street that bears her name, and the Leaside home that she so enjoyed is still standing, and there's on that site an historic plaque. To their credit, there's a dedicated group of Macphail fans, East Yorkers and Leasiders, who remember the lady with an Agnes Macphail Recognition Award. And that's presented annually to an individual whose community activities embrace many of the concerns and interests that were once so prominently identified with Agnes Campbell Macphail herself.
On the art of the insult. In response to a heckler who yelled, "Why don't you get yourself a man?" I replied, "What guarantee have I he wouldn't turn out like you?"
The Harris Letter. A snowstorm swept across Grey County, thwarting a number of rural voters in the 1940 federal election and contributing to Aggie's defeat. Markdale lawyer Walter Harris's winning campaign was part of the Liberal Party's sweeping majority across the country. Voters sought change, and Macphail's once solid base had eroded. She was no longer the invincible political force she had been for almost 20 years. Certainly, Harris was a more able and erudite opponent than she had faced in earlier elections. But victory for Walter Harris came with much condemnation for having toppled a legend. This became apparent in an exchange of letters between the newly elected MP and a legal colleague at Osgoode Hall in Toronto.
Dear Cecil, many thanks for your kind letter. Though, to be frank about it, I'm beginning to wonder if I shouldn't resign and let Agnes have the seat again, in view of all the newspaper editorials regretting her defeat. Apparently, the only newspaper in the province that had anything good to say about it was the Windsor Star, and all the rest were unanimous the other way. So, I guess I am public enemy number one.
You cannot stop reform. You can try. You can stupidly stand in the path of progress and do all you can to stop it, but all you can succeed in doing is to dam the thing back until it gets beyond control and then causes the very upheavals and difficulties which we all deplore and which none of us want.
Final years, final days. Agnes Macphail's life in Ottawa as a woman MP came to an end when she lost her federal seat to Liberal Walter Harris, a lawyer from Markdale, in 1940. But her political life resumed in 3 years when, as a CCF candidate, she ran successfully in the Toronto riding of East York, recognized as one of the first 2 women to enter the Ontario legislature. She was to run again in the Ontario provincial election of 1948 and was the only woman elected. However, now in failing health, she was defeated in 1951. Plagued by recurring bouts of ill health, Agnes Macphail had much yet to accomplish, but working around the clock was no longer possible. Recuperating from a second stroke in 1952, she found herself $2,000 richer as a result of a winning lottery ticket purchased from her newspaper delivery boy. Taking cash instead of a new automobile, the funds made it possible to visit Scotland. It turned out to be the final trip to the land of her Scottish ancestors. In her declining years and ineligible for a federal pension, making ends meet was a constant challenge. A Senate appointment, which many agreed she certainly deserved, was still being considered by Prime Minister Louis Saint Laurent at the time of her passing. Word that she had succumbed to a heart attack on February 13th in Toronto's Wellesley Hospital shocked her many friends and admirers nationwide, including inmates of Canada's prisons who mourned their great champion. Honored by 3 funeral services in Toronto, Flesherton, and Priceville, Agnes Macphail was buried in the family plot within McNeil Cemetery, Priceville, next to her parents. Interestingly, her name on the family gravestone is shown as Agnes Macphail with an uppercase P. The day of the burial services at St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church in Priceville is reputed to have been one of the worst Grey County winter days on record. Throughout her lifetime, Agnes had known such storms and political storms as well. She was now at rest, having done more than her share for others. The Canadian Encyclopedia had sent Agnes a form letter to be completed, making it possible for them to update information they had on hand. The letter was located in the hospital, and it was mailed back 2 days after her death. In printing barely discernible, it read,
Went to League of Nations with Canadian delegation in 1929, went to Northern Europe, Sweden, Denmark, and Russia with McGill Group in 1937, spoke from Atlantic to Pacific in USA and in Canada, and also made speeches in London, England.
Under special honors or other important facts, she printed,
No special honors, except the love of the people, which I value more than any other.
By arrangement with Agnes's surviving sisters, Gertha and Lily, and encouraged by women senators and members of Parliament, a bust of Agnes by sculptor Félix de Weldon was installed in the Parliament buildings in Ottawa, 1955. It remains there to this day. Our MP's greeting.
Hi, it's Alex Ruff, Member of Parliament for Bruce Grey Owen Sound. I'd like to commend the fantastic work of the Friends of the South Grey Museum for their work in putting together this documentary, No Bed of Roses, Agnes Macphail's Life in Politics. I appreciate the efforts from all individuals to honor not only a local icon, but a groundbreaking force in Canadian politics. Born in Grey County, Agnes Macphail was first elected to represent the riding of Grey Southeast and would later represent the riding of Grey Bruce. Here's Agnes, this bus that sits beside me, just in front of the doors to the House of Commons. She worked hard to represent farmers and rural interests in Ottawa. She knew what mattered to rural communities, and she was instrumental in the establishment of old age pensions and the reform of our Canadian prison system. Agnes Macphail's legacy has paved the way for many women in politics and many others. A point I'd like to address is last night I had the privilege to be at an event supporting our Canadian publishers, and look at the book I was able to pick up. Amazing Women in Canada, Agnes Macphail. She still continues to make a difference today. Once again, I'd like to thank the small but mighty group of volunteers of the Friends of the South Grey Museum for putting this community documentary together to celebrate the achievements of Agnes Macphail.
When Agnes spoke.
Hello, everyone. It is such a pleasure to take part in this program for Agnes Macphail. You've probably all heard the expression, I would not be the person I am today were it not for the influence of such and such an individual. Well, with regard to Agnes Macphail and myself, I think that expression could quite literally apply. I would not be the person I am today were it not for the influence of Agnes Macphail. As some of you know, my parents worked for Agnes Macphail. My mother in the capacity of a live-in housekeeper and caregiver for Agnes's mother, and my father as a chauffeur who sometimes would take Agnes to political functions like picnics. And it was on one of these excursions that my father met my mother. They fell in love, and the rest is history for the Sinclair family. So it is with particular pleasure that I present this poem to you today as a tribute to Agnes Macphail, and in recognition, really, of all the individuals in this area who 100 years ago trusted her enough to put her in a position where someday she would be recognized and designated as a woman of national historic significance. How amazing is that? So I offer you When Agnes Spoke. When Agnes spoke, people listened, for her voice was commanding and true, and she used it to champion causes, to accomplish everything she could do, to improve conditions for farmers, whose votes catapulted to fame an inspiring soul from Grey County to a leading role on Canada's stage. When Agnes spoke, people listened, as her voice rose upward and smashed those barriers to gender equality in society's ceiling of glass. Shards of the past that women today must remember with grateful applause for the lady from Grey, whose vision helped pave new inroads in Canada's laws. On the national stage, many battles were waged, and her voice was not always heard. But a change was discerned when colleagues soon learned that Agnes stayed true to her words. She wasn't afraid to have ripples made, and with tenacity wouldn't let go of situations she saw that contained many flaws, and she challenged the old status quo. The conditions in prisons were just one example of compassion for sights she deplored. No one could rehabilitate in such conditions of hate, and the squalor she could not ignore. In the League of Nations, she found a place for her passionate voice for peace. She recognized society's need for reform and defended all colors and creeds. And when hecklers berated her vision, or when opposing issues were raised, her humor, blended with a knife-sharp wit, was a trademark approach she engaged. She speaks to us still from Parliament Hill, where her legacy continues to shine in benefits we might take for granted, but her signature is clearly enshrined. Her achievements were many, as she paved the way for generations of women who all need to pay a debt of gratitude to Agnes Macphail for lighting a pathway and blazing a trail. Yet over the years, her voice seems subdued in our rapidly changing world. But thanks to the efforts of people with vision, we're remembering our Grey County girl who rose to fame from a humble life, without wealth or advantage beyond a pioneer family whose values and guidance shaped a character determined and strong. Thanks to many committees, now road signs exist, and a cairn's been erected with credit to Donna Mann. And now this art installation from Holger's imagination. These have all helped Grey County expand the value that's placed on heritage, the awareness that Agnes Macphail must stay in the forefront forever, where all local heroes prevail. They give us hope and inspire us all to reach for the elusive star that guides our personal destiny and raises the excellence bar. Future students will know that generations ago, Agnes rose to the top like cream, thanks to farmers who trusted a woman's voice to speak for their hopes and their dreams. Her voice is now silent, but if she could speak from wherever her spirit now roams, perhaps she might say something like this to folks from her former home. I fought for your rights, so your personal plight would be less difficult than our ancestors knew. Please take up the cause and ensure that our laws protect all Canadians, not just a few. Speak for me now, as the years unfold, and use a voice that's commanding and true. Then people will listen and will know that you stand behind everything you choose to do. To give to mankind, regardless of creed, the chance for a better life, to possess all the means to fulfill all your dreams. For that was my one wish for you. Thank you, Agnes Macphail, and thanks to each one of you for listening.
The commemorative banknote.
In January 2016, the Archives at Grey Roots was telephoned by a visual content analyst, Boyd Lanstra, at the Bank of Canada with a query to confidentially make a request. Mr. Lanstra would not tell me why they were approaching the archives without first signing a non-disclosure agreement. I told Petal Furness, my supervisor and manager at Grey Roots Museum and Archives at the time, that I had been approached with a request from the Bank of Canada for the archives, but I first was requested to sign this non-disclosure agreement. She advised that since it was a request for the archives, as the archivist, I should handle it. Even more than the non-disclosure agreement, how excited Boyd Lanstra was by the fact that he was required to tell me about the project and the image he was interested in, impressed upon me that he really was only himself allowed to tell people information on an as-needed basis for anti-counterfeiting purposes. I was told at the time that there were going to be 4 portraits featured on a banknote, but only that Agnes Macphail was one of them. The bank was very interested in confirming that the image was reasonably close to the time that Macphail was first elected in 1921. The drop-waisted dress Macphail is wearing is a style popular of the 1920s. The image has no date written on, and the photographer is not known. Joan Burroughs, a great niece of Agnes Macphail, also had an album with the same image that she helpfully allowed me to inspect for a date, without me being permitted to divulge the specific purpose. But it too was not dated. Historical detective work continued to find other images with dates to compare general appearance of age, hairstyle, and glasses frames. Boyd Lanstra from the Bank of Canada explained that the image would then be used as a reference by an artist in the creation of an etching or line work from which the notes would be printed. Our final preparation work was for Grey Roots to assist with proofreading a document with the essential details of Macphail's life, understanding that the Government of Canada was in a better position to check her dates of service, while we could confirm more local details, such as the life dates they were using, were also on her memorial stone. Joan Hislop, our collections registrar at the time, also reviewed the document simply for a researcher. Then to add excitement, came the #BankNotable campaign in early spring 2016 to select a candidate for the new $10 note to be released in 2018. This campaign, although for a different note, showed enthusiasm throughout the county to see Agnes Macphail be commemorated. The County of Grey, with the #BecauseOfAgnes social media campaign, other organizations, local media, and individuals alike worked to get the word out to nominate Agnes Macphail for consideration. The story was covered in the Owen Sound Sun-Times, Hanover Post, Meaford Express, Flusherton Advance, Grey Roots This Week, Mosaic Magazine. There was disappointment when Agnes did not make the long list of finalists, although you have probably figured out why. On April 7, 2017, the Bank of Canada unveiled the design of the Canada 150 commemorative note in Ottawa. This note formally entered into circulation June 1, 2017.
Gentlemen, no bed of roses. Couple of notes I made while watching. An amazingly comprehensive story, informative, historically correct, long awaited, long overdue. And I'm going to ask Barry now, because we're going to enter our question and answer period. If Steve can pass the mic, or Steve, are you passing the mics around? Thank you. I want to ask Barry, what are the plans for getting this in front of a broader audience?
Do we have, yes, we have a mic. I don't want the first question to be one where I turn it to one of my colleagues, but I still think I will, because I do feel that two producers who are here, the senior producer, Tim Riley from Leaking Ambiance Studio in Flesherton, is the man that really made this really work tonight. And also, we have Jeff Bowes here, who was an associate producer and helped immensely. And I have a wife tapping me on the shoulder.
We have already had 2 requests.
Yes. Yes, Jane is telling me that, and she's quite right, the phone was very busy earlier today, and it wasn't just people who could not be here. There were many, many people that wanted to be here, and would you believe it, it turns out that for some it was the staff Christmas party night, it was family pre-holidays gatherings that had been planned for months on end, and so those were the calls we were fending, but along with the calls that we took, and the phone began to ring early this morning, were 2 inquiries outside our region wanting to be able to show this. And one came from a local woman who has a contact with a former Toronto councillor that Jane and I know very well from our years in the East York Leaside area before we had the sense in '87 to become part of Grey County. And that particular councillor, Janet Davies, apparently would like to host and do something in the Toronto area, and we've had a similar request from another area. I'm just wondering, Tim and Jeff, do you want to get in on this?
Do we have to?
You don't have to, but Mr. Technology is what we call Tim when we don't call him other things, and he's the man that makes it all work, and it would not have been possible to have been streamed this evening and to have some future showings that I think are planned if it wasn't for Tim Riley and the audio studio that we enjoy in Flesherton. So Tim, yeah, a big vote of thanks. You know, when we're giving thanks, and there were credits at the end of the screen, and you saw those credits, we just show so much talent in this area. We really do. You know, from Eugenia, we have Barb Pern. Some of her wonderful paintings appeared in this production. One of my great favorites, and I think he maybe is the dean of Grey County photographers, Telfer Weg from Neustadt, and young Oliver Keating from these parts, who is a new up-and-coming photographer. Their work all made it happen, and it was never intended to be, sort of a match, the narration that it was my privilege to write, but we didn't want to take the old hat approach and nail every word with, some visual that would jump at you on the screen. But we wanted to show the breadth of the talent in this area, like the young photographer and the older photographer and Barbara Pern, among others. So a great many people made this a community production. They really did. That's getting off the track, I think, in connection with the question you had, Terry. But I just feel that people need to be recognized. And in recognizing people, it's too bad they've left the room. But as Jane and I have got older, the Plenners, a wonderful couple, Steve and Catherine, are they still here with us? There's Steve back there. They are such a bonus to this part of Ontario, and they really stepped up and did so much to make tonight happen, including the refreshments that I, for one, am looking forward to.
Thanks, Barry. So, from up top, the two of our angels up top by the microphones, everybody else, do you have anything to add to that, please?
We've got a very short cable here, so I have to peer around the monitor at you, Terry. Well, what are the plans for that? Well, I don't know.
Well, the question was, what are the next steps?
The exec is going to tell us where we're going next, I guess, and we should make sure that we get the right, rights for all the images we've shown, and that's about it.
All right. I should add that Tim has been working on this night and day. He's dreadfully tired today, as this was our inaugural gala showing. There will be some tweaks of this production to come in the future in anticipation of it being live streamed or rebroadcast elsewhere.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, this, of course, as I've started out, is the interactive part. This is where you get a chance to make comments, to ask questions, or to say whatever you want. Steve is going to be going around with the microphone. If you'd like to ask a question or comment, please put your hand up, and Steve will come to you.
Test.
Just push the little thing at the side there, Steve. Try turn it off now again.
Oh, that's pretty loud. My question is, I have a copy of her birth registration, Agnes's, and her birth name is Agnes Macphail. And so did she later add Campbell? Did she do a name change, or is it Campbell? She just stuck it in because her mom was a Campbell?
All right, it's a good question, and we'll turn it back to Barry.
Well, she was proud, of course, of the ancestry that meant so much to her. And you had the Campbells on the one side, her mother, Henrietta Campbell, and Dugald, her father, the farmer auctioneer that many old-timers remembered so well. So, it was really a case of, we could have just called her Agnes Macphail, but we have chosen to call her Agnes Campbell Macphail because she was so proud of that Scottish ancestry, and I think she wanted both sides of the family to always be known and recognized. Yeah.
Thank you. At the back.
Test. So in 1921, when Agnes was elected, she was outspoken about the Royal Military Academy, apparently, because of the patronage appointments to wealthy families as candidates. And also, I guess she had also audited the education component, felt that it was really lacking. Do you know if there was many changes made after that? I know she had support for it. Sam Hughes was a big supporter of the of changes in the military academy.
That was Barry just asking. Basically, Barry, the question about is, if I can reiterate, after the change, after she spoke about difficulty with promotions and what else was it, Cliff? In the military academies and stuff,
that's right,
through patronage, through people of wealth. Were there changes after she got involved in that?
No, you're not.
Yeah, there you are.
I think that there were some changes. In fact, I will say this much. One of the things that made her unpopular in some circles was that she was very much against war. Very much. And she felt that a lot of time and a lot of money had been spent on grooming cadets and kind of glorifying war. So you can imagine how unpopular she was, particularly during wartime. During the Second World War, she paid quite a price for making her views known that she was against war, and yet, when it was necessary, she voted along with Prime Minister Mackenzie King to make sure that we were there doing our part. She knew enough to realize that was necessary, that our men and our women had to participate. But war was something, she thought we glorified war far too much, and that we should be, making more of peace. And of course, she was a great person for peace. And it was mentioned more than once, including in the production, that she was the first woman to go to the League of Nations in Geneva, and there she was certainly pushing for world peace. I think world peace was very important to her, whether it be peace at home or peace in the world. I'm not so sure I've answered your question as well as I would like to, but I think that I will go back to reminding, as Terry did earlier, that we have books about Macphail, several of them in our libraries, where biographers and historians have found her of interest, have devoted their time to researching her life, writing books about her. I would commend those books to you, suggest that you turn to them because they do exist in our library branches, and I think you'll learn a lot more about Macphail. I do want to say this much, if I may. For me, as somebody whose entire working years has involved a great deal of immersion in Canadian history and historical research, two things that turned up made it all worthwhile, and that is the existence of film footage with the voice of Jim Palmer. Jim Palmer was a young fellow from Dundalk. They tell me old Dundalk people remember when there was a photographer's studio in Dundalk, the Palmer Studio. But Jim Palmer was the young man that Agnes recruited to manage her 1935 campaign. And so he was the voice you were hearing. And it's so exciting for anybody immersing themselves in historical research to be able to come up with a voice of the past. And there in that film, we had Jim Palmer recalling the woman he'd come to know so well, that he had traveled with, and he'd managed that 1935 campaign. And he was the man with that delightful story about somebody going because it was one of her constituents, and they wanted to track her down because they had a question. You politicians know what that's all about. And so this person shows up in Markdale, goes to the House of Refuge, is Agnes Campbell Macphail, and the person on the desk with her batting an eye says, not yet. So that was a find. But you know, the other great find for me personally in this whole production is that letter. The letter that, you know, was written by Walter Harris when he began to wonder if he shouldn't give the seat back to Agnes because he was so unpopular because of the wind. And I thought that was very telling. And we're so fortunate that that letter turned up. And we also have seen the reply from the man at Osgoode Hall, who was actually wanting to congratulate Harris, and I don't think really expected that Harris up here was paying the price he was for his victory. But you know, that was the year of a very big, right across the country, liberal landslide. So it happened everywhere.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? All right, ladies and gentlemen, there's, well, one interesting thing is that she was representing the UFO, the United Farmers of Ontario, and I'm sure giving it a 21st century perspective, a lot of the male sitting members of Parliament thought she was definitely from a UFO and an alien in the house at the time. All right, we're going to move on just quickly now. We're sort of wrapping up. Right now we have a poinsettia draw. As you came in, you may have noticed that there is a beautiful poinsettia plant sitting on the table as you came in. And we are going to have our mayor, Paul McQueen, if you would come up, please, and do the draw. And Jane has told me that when you pick it up, there's a special plastic bag it goes into because these plants are susceptible to the cold. So she will give you the plastic bag also. Actually, Steve's holding it right there. So Paul, if you'd be so kind as to draw, have your little ticket stubs ready, and I'll let you read the number off.
May be real popular or not popular. Oh gosh. Sign of age.
Old age is fun, isn't it?
All right, here we go. 4, 3, 3, 1, 7, 9. Dane! Congratulations. Hope you like poinsettias.
179.
There you go.
Well, if you'd like to pick it up. Dane Nielsen, there's something funny about this, you know. I mean, here's the mayor giving the gift to the deputy mayor. Aha. It was fated, ladies and gentlemen. It was fated. Congratulations, Dane, and thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, the Friends of the South Grey Museum would also like to acknowledge our special guests, the dignitaries here today. And we have a special Agnes Macphail tote bag for them. Jane is holding one right now. Inside of the bag, you will find some extra programs for sharing with your colleagues. Please be sure to check with Jane Gibson to receive your individual tote bags this evening before you leave. A production as one such as this, you've seen, requires an organization that brought together tonight's premiere. It rests in the capable on the capable shoulders of many. We'd like to take a moment to recognize and to thank them in no particular order. The first of all, the Friends of the South Grey Museum, as well as the curator of the South Grey Museum, Peter Whitehead. If you could either acknowledge by putting your hands up or stand, we'd appreciate that. Friends of the museum, Stuart, I see you there. That includes the board of directors too, I should have said. Thank you. The museum advisory board, here we go. Are here today too. So Stuart Halliday and others from the advisory board, please put your hands up again. Thank you. We thank them. We also, of course, like to thank a special thanks to Jane and Barry. Up in the loft, Tim Riley's Learning Ambience Studio in Flesherton was the one behind all the technical work and effort that went into putting together this amazing documentary. So congratulations and thank you to them. Thanks go to the municipality of Grey Highlands and the council and staff who have been supporting the South Grey Museum all these many years. With us today, along with the mayor, is the Deputy Mayor, Dane Nielsen. Please stand up, Dane, so we can acknowledge you. And also our new re-elected councillor, Tom Allwood. Tom? Is Jennifer Morley here tonight? Could she make it? Jennifer Morley was going to be here. She is the CEO of the Flesherton Library and has been involved in some of the assistance of putting together some of the archival and historical material for the presentation and for the documentary. We'd also like to thank the Community Foundation of Grey Bruce for the funding grant that they gave in order to help make this possible. A special thanks also go to Catherine and Steve Plenner for tonight's setup. They're the ones that did a lion's work in setting up today and preparing the refreshments, which we are going to invite you to take in right after I'm finished in about 2 or 3 minutes. They'll be in the room to the right of the entrance, straight through the entrance as you came in. So we'd like to thank them very much. And Catherine, where is she? Oh, did you want to say anything? Okay, could you say that?
Since it is a long December evening in Grey, if you would like to hit the road, so to speak, I have small Ziploc bags in the kitchenette. If you'd like to meet me there, you can take some treats for the way home.
We in Grey County are prepared for anything, so you've got Ziploc bags, take them home, and when you're in a ditch, you won't starve to death tonight. Actually, the only people that are ever in a ditch, and this is, I know this from being here for 30 years, are people who come from afar to visit us. We know where the ditches are, especially in the winter when the snow covers that ditch. They seem to pull over and just go, whoop, and away they go. Anyhow, if you are hungry and in a rush, that will be available. Special thanks must go to the Ainslie United Church for the use of these magnificent facilities, which have been upgraded, as you can see, through the technical improvements of today. This is such an amazing venue for these sorts of things. So thank you to Ainslie United. And finally, at the risk of missing someone who had a part in this successful production, all of those who, despite the pandemic, encouraged us to keep on going. A thank you to each and every one of you in attendance tonight. We now invite you to partake in the refreshments located in the adjoining room. Please do not forget your tote bags. And thank you for your attendance. God bless you, grant you a safe journey home, a Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year, and thank you and good night.